This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
And I'll never forget, I've had multiple caregivers tell me this. I know how to help people live, but I don't know what I'm doing when it comes for them to go. So then there's an education process between that caregiver, whether it's hired help, whatever, coming in to caregive, and the family. So you're educating three different roles there: client, family, caregiver. It's important.
This is the Heart of Hospice podcast with Helen Bauer. Today's show features End of Life Doula Anna Adams, founder of the International Doula Life Movement. Whether you're a family caregiver or an end-of-life professional, the Heart of Hospice is here to enhance your hospice experience by connecting you with information you can use about end-of-life care.
The sponsor for this episode of the Heart of Hospice is National HME. National HME is a direct service hospice durable medical equipment company. Using their proprietary software, Hospice Cloud Pro, providers can enter new patient information, order equipment, arrange pickups, and obtain real-time reporting, including order status and much more. National HME excels at providing service with care and empathy. To learn more, visit nationalhme.com. Today's episode is sponsored by Odonata Care. Odonata's motto is, "Care is treatment." They have a mission to transform the end-of-life experience for the patient and caregivers through education and support. Odonata Care is revolutionizing the hospice experience with their booklet, The Care Plan, A Path to Comfort for the Hospice Patient, along with 50 free YouTube videos that teach the basics of bedside care. Visit thecareplan.net for more information. Now, here's today's episode.
So this is episode number 3 of a 3-part series where we've been talking to end-of-life doulas or death doulas from an organization called the International Doula Life Movement. Our first interview was with Anna Adams, who's the founder of the International Doula Life Movement. Second interview in the series was with Pam Carter. We were talking about advanced care planning and how end-of-life and death doulas help people with advanced care planning. Today we're talking with Anna again, and we're going to be talking about the role of the end-of-life doula at the very end of life, during the active dying phase of things, and at the time of death, and then actually beyond that as well. Like I said, Anna Adams is the founder of the International Doula Life Movement. She began her caregiving journey as a teenager, volunteering at a local hospital in the ICU. She's now a certified end-of-life doula and an end-of-life educator. In that role, she's helping thousands of families go through their end-of-life journeys. So she is an expert on the role of the end-of-life doula. We're talking about rituals, sacred space, those hard-to-have conversations, and how a doula fits in to all of those things. So here's my conversation with Anna Adams. Anna, welcome back to the podcast. It's great to have you back.
Oh, thank you so much. Glad to be back.
So we're talking all things doula again. This is the third episode in our 3-part series on end-of-life doulas and partnering with the International Doula Life Movement, you and Pam Carter. So we've been talking about the role of the doula leading up in the trajectory of a serious illness. And then Pam and I talked about the role of the doula when it comes to advanced care planning and supporting a patient in advanced care planning and the family as well. So today we're talking about the role of the doula at the very end of life. Because people have a tendency to think doulas only work with people right at that very end when they're actively dying and at the time of death. But of course, that's not true.
Right.
Doulas can be involved with someone with a serious illness for a long time before that. But today we are just focusing on that end of life, the actively dying phase, and at that time of death and moving forward after that. So let's talk about that. What is the role of an end-of-life doula when that person is actively dying?
So a lot of people think because of doulas that we have to sit vigil. There's some doulas that don't, and that's okay. But what I like to do, if it's a family that I have that they feel like, hey, we've got this. And some people get that way because they've been dealing with this disease for a long time. The family's tired, the client's tired. They are ready for this to be the final moments. We've educated with them. We've been talking. We've been preparing them. So then typically sometimes I'll do texts or phone call check-ins or a pop-in, So many doulas think that, I got to do a vigil 24/7. You don't necessarily have to. Now, I do have families that I do, am there around the clock. And typically I find those clients are my older clients, elderly clients who may not have any family nearby. Sometimes it is families, they have busy lives, they're running other businesses, they've got things going on.
Sure.
So, I will be there to help because then they're like, hey, you know what? We have Anna there. It's okay, and we've said our goodbyes. We want to be in this part of this moment, and that's okay. Everybody, but has their way of working through that. But at the end, we can be there during the day, during the nights, whatever it is, to help creating that sacred space, providing support, reinforcing the education, because emergency happens. And what happens when we have an emergency? Everything flies out of our head. And even though we've talked about it 110 times, families can get excited about it. And so I reinforce the calmness into the room with them to understand, to say, okay, remember when we talked about them having this breathing change? And then, and then they're like, oh yeah. So then when they realize, we've already talked about this, we already know that this has happened, they seem to take like a sigh of relief. Okay, now we're focused back. And then as it progresses more and more and more, I've been doing this so long, I can typically be with the client and know very, very spot on. Okay, we're very, very close. We have hours to minutes. And I will typically tell them, look, I don't know for sure. I always tell them, I don't know for sure, even though I may know something. I have that hinge, but I'll tell them, we don't know for sure, but this is very close to those signs that we talked about where we have hours to minutes. And then they'll ask, what do I do? Sit there, hold hands, reminisce, share the stories. Put the quiet music on or soothing music on, dim the lights if you wish, put some candles on, whatever can make the room comfortable for them. And that's when we go into that.
What do you think is the most distressing symptom when it comes to a client actively dying that families find most distressing?
I will have to say when the breathing patterns start changing, or they start hearing the gurgling at times.
Right.
Although what I do is I do really, really try to educate early on that we want to have, like Barbara Karn says, our body's a sponge. We want to have it dry. And so I really use that analogy to explain to them, this is why we don't want to, put any type of water, having them drink, things like that could cause that extra wetness. That can kind of be a fearful moment for families. I feel like they're like, but they can't breathe. And, it hurts us more than it does our clients.
Right.
But it just reinforcement constantly.
Yeah. I think the fact that gurgling, those secretions in the back of the throat, they have such a nasty word for it. I actually hate that term, death rattle. I think it's a terrible term. And if somebody said, oh, your loved one's going to make this horrible gurgling sound, it's going to sound like she's choking to death on her own secretions. Well, of course it's distressing. And I totally agree. When you're in the moment of something like that, overwhelmed with grief and fear and managing the unknown for someone that you care about, and then all this education that you've had that the doula's given, it's just gone. You just forget all of it.
You do. It's just that excitement of that emergency that you feel that sense of urgency. And this is why it's so important for us to have that connection with hospice as well, because they can't always spend that time like we can.
True.
In there. They don't have. There's just constantly more paperwork being thrown onto them, more steps of things that they have to do. So if we can have a doula in place, we can be reinforcing, we can cut down the calls for triage for these things that are natural parts of the dying process. The doula can be there to reassure them. We've now saved some time to our hospice team. So I think it's very, very well worth it. A very important aspect.
I've heard families calling a hospice agency when they're out there on their own and they have these questions, mom's gurgling, her breathing patterns changed, or she's getting restless. A lot of times those questions are answered over the phone. But what we know is that in-person presence, if we haven't learned anything from the pandemic, we've certainly learned this. In-person presence makes such a difference. A doula exudes the calm. You can hear it in your voice. Here's what's happening. I think over the phone, we have a tendency to say, well, this is all part of the process. This is normal. Well, I don't know who you think it's normal for, but she hadn't been like this before.
And you don't really know this because you're not hearing it.
Yeah. And how do you know this is normal? Because you're not here. And it's definitely not normal for the caregiver. I think when we use those phrases to families and caregivers, this is normal, it's dismissive. It says, you don't need to worry about this. I've even heard nurses do that. Oh, you don't have to worry about that. Too late. They're already worrying. And guess what? We don't get to tell them what to worry about. So having that doula presence to remind them, so here is what you're seeing. As Barbara Carnes would tell you, they're doing the labor. And yes, that is a very normal part of the dying process. But for somebody who's in the middle of that distressing moment and the grief, none of that is normal. So, a doula to be able to lead and be a companion there, a knowledgeable guide through the whole thing. It's such a gift, such a gift.
It is. And it's a really important spot that, like you mentioned a minute ago, when you're calling in, families feel very, I guess in a way, very dismissed. But you're not getting it. You don't see the urgency. They feel like there's a disconnect. But if a doula can be there, then that connection makes it. And I always like to tell my families, when I know that they are actively transitioning, I give them everything that this is what you can see, you may see. So that way it's not initially ripping off that Band-Aid for them. It's like, okay, they're preparing for it.
Right.
And then as it starts coming, oh yeah, I remember you said that, yes. And, I've usually used my little pink Barbara Carnes book. And, I've had families even start checking things off as we see in things.
Right.
And we go back and reference right back into that book.
Knowing what to expect, I think, is very powerful. Very powerful, and it creates that sense of confidence. And we're talking as if everybody has the same sort of look, right? We know the dying process, there's a list of however many things, let's say 20, that are all within the normal scope of that labor of dying. But not everybody hits all those things. Your loved one may not have the gurgling, may not have the secretions. Some people have terminal fever when the body's thermostat no longer regulates, and so fever is present. But not everybody has that. So within that list of, say, 20 things, you may only check off 11. Every death looks a little bit different. And I think that unpredictability for people can be frightening.
Very.
So then having the knowledge of a doula really, really is important.
I was going to say with even fever, that is something, because as we are healthy and we have a fever, if we're sick, the higher the fever gets, the more like, shouldn't we call 911? Shouldn't we get them to the hospital? I've seen very high fevers. And so that's when I'm like, okay, let's get some little towels. Let's put some, it's more of a comfort, because then I will tell them at this point, they could go very, very quickly. It's their body just, shutting down, like, okay, I'm done, but they're going to spike that high fever. We'll put the comforting, but if you want, this is the moment. This could be possibly the moment. And it can be very scary, especially when they're spiking. So I had a patient that had previous stroke, spiked a really high fever. We got the nurse, called them right away and let them know, because shortly after they begin seizing.
Yeah.
Then after that, it was really the downhill quick was even faster. So it was something that I let them know, okay, hey, this is really spiking up. We're going to call the nurse. I want you to be prepared, because you may see this. It was still an intense moment, but it was like, okay, well, she already said this was going to happen. This could possibly happen. We've already called the nurse. They're going to be coming out anyways. And it just really soothed people more gently and to, okay, this is what's happening.
With a lot of the symptoms that we see, we want to act and we want to intervene, like the terminal fever. We want to medicate. At that point, those medications aren't effective. The body can't take them in. They can't use them. We're not going to give Tylenol. More than likely, your person's not going to be able to swallow anyway. Tylenol suppository is not going to be effective. So we have other ways, like you're saying, we use the cool packs. But people, especially caregivers, when you've been doing this for a while and taking care of each need, then those needs that come up during the dying process feel like things that need intervention.
Yeah. I've even been asked with clients, well, I have a personal caregiver. They've been with me for X amount of years. And why do we need a doula on top of having our other caregiver?
Right.
Here's why. And I'll never forget, I've had multiple caregivers tell me this. I know how to help people live, but I don't know what I'm doing when it comes for them to go. So then there's an education process between that caregiver, whether it's hired help, whatever, coming in to caregive, and the family. So you're educating 3 different roles there: client, family, caregiver. It's important.
And a hired caregiver, I think that's a wonderful point. I'd love to emphasize that. They are about the work of helping people live.
Yes.
Yes. Supporting their mobility, helping their personal care, engaging their social life, their psychosocial and their communication, advocating for them and giving them meds. That's all about living and thriving. Personal caregivers like that are not typically trained in how to help someone die or how to be a companion as someone is dying. That's a very good point, because that is truly the role of a doula, an end-of-life doula.
Because one of the things I think this also brings up is this is where we need to have all fields, whether it's home health, whether it's provider services, whether it's, our med-surg nurses, or our, any area, orthopedics even, any area, have this specialized training of end of life, because it can happen at any time. Someone goes to surgery, they throw a clot and it's not caught. What happens?
Right. And here you have an intensivist that is the lead of the team.
Right.
So what if your oncologist talked to you when you have a serious illness and you're being treated for cancer, talk to you not only about palliative care, but said, I'd love for you to start working with a doula and have some doula support, and here's what it might look like. You can take it or leave it. Of course, patients have the right to choose. But wouldn't it be great if they knew that was just another resource they could offer to a patient?
Oh, absolutely.
And I will tell you, as a nurse, I never knew anything about that kind of stuff. I didn't know anything about hospice until I came to work for hospice. And I was a home health nurse. Those two silos of healthcare are very side by side, very connected.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But I think that's why it's so important that everyone goes through that, the doula side of it, because again, it doesn't matter if you're 18 or 90 or 100, you should have a doula.
The sponsor for this episode of The Heart of Hospice is Odonata Care. Odonata Care founders Nancy Hireman and Brenda Kazire are certified hospice and palliative nurses with over 40 years combined experience. They are experts in end-of-life care. Nancy and Brenda have created a 32-page booklet called The Care Plan, A Path to Comfort for the Hospice Patient. Their goal is to empower patients and their caregivers with valuable information right at their fingertips, wherever and whenever they need it. Odonata Care also offers a suite of 50 free training videos on YouTube that teaches the basics of bedside care for personal and professional caregivers. Nancy and Brenda have a mission to transform the end-of-life experience through education and support. That's why Odonata Care's motto is, "Care is Treatment." You can purchase copies of the Care Plan for yourself or your hospice agency at thecareplan.net. A new Spanish edition is also available for purchase on their website in either print or digital versions. The sponsor for this episode of The Heart of Hospice is National HME. National HME is a direct service hospice durable medical equipment company that's serious about providing excellent service through communication and coordination for providers and families. They aim to be an extension of the hospice care team and to make DME the easiest part of the hospice provider's day. Using their proprietary software, Hospice Cloud Pro, providers can enter new patient information, order equipment, arrange pickups, and obtain real-time reporting on their order status, plus much more. National HME also provides text message notifications which keep everyone up to date on when the equipment will be delivered. National understands how important communication is when it comes to every aspect of a hospice patient's care. Here's Chris Maglioka, Senior Vice President of Business Development, describing how National HME technicians stay connected with patients and families.
The family will know through text messaging when the technician's on their way. They'll actually know the technician's name. So, we get the order, our call center calls that patient's family and lets them know, we received the order from the hospice, we'll be out there this afternoon. The technician will contact you with an ETA, and then again, they're going to get that next phone call plus a text message from the technician introducing themselves, letting them know who they are, and then with their ETA. It all starts and ends with the communication part.
National HME does more than just provide equipment. They provide service with care and empathy. To learn more about the services provided by National HME, you can visit their website at nationalhme.com.
Okay, so let's talk about the most intense time, right? The presence of a doula at the time of death for that family. How does a doula support a family or the caregivers that are present at the time of death?
So there is a lot of emotional support happening. I like to bring my families to the bedside, let them, take part, whether it's sitting, standing nearby, somebody holding a leg, part of their legs, putting hands on the person that's died or dying. Either way, putting their hands and just, finding a point. It depends on their religions. Sometimes there's those sacredness that they're bringing in. But if it's a family that doesn't, or who maybe are not religious families, we could come in and I make a point of, do you want to do lotion? And we can sit here as long as we need, especially if they're not doing any type of services. I like to spend extra time at the end with them, whether it's sitting there and sharing with the family, them coming together, whatever it could be. It could be oils, it could be lotion, it could just simply being there present quietly with them. It's so important.
There's incredible strength and power in moments like that. I think it's so valuable to honor that, because for a lot of folks, that's the last time that you are together. And it's also important to recognize that this is the last physical moment that this person will be present in that caregiving environment. And a lot of times it's a home, a private home where they've been living for years with a partner, and shortly they will be leaving. And so that physical presence of the body is very important. Anna, what if you have a family that doesn't want to engage with the actual body once the patient has died? How does a doula support a family that doesn't really want to engage that closely with the body?
We have to listen to the families. And that's, again, our biggest job as a doula is listening. So it could be going into another room if they don't want to no longer be in that room after it happens, going into the other room. Usually the biggest questions that are always asked is like, what's next? And I'm like, well, we have all the time we need. We have all the time that we can take. We can, why don't we have some coffee or some tea and just breathe for a minute and sit down. And okay, so now here's our stats. We're going to call hospice. Then they will take care of the funeral home, blah, 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 step down the line. And really, then sometimes I notice when we sit down and just take that contemplative moment of quietness, they start opening up. Oh, I'll never forget, Dad, remember when we had, it's something, it could be something in the kitchen, food or a drink that, you remember that one time we spilled this all over and got on Dad's important paperwork. Oh my gosh, he was so mad, and then the conversations end up happening.
Yeah.
And it's really a beautiful way. And I think that some of the families, the whole moment in that room is sacred, and it is a special space as well, but also making a sacred space outside the room. There's just some that after it happens, they just can't process anymore, or it's just like, I need to shut off for a second.
Well, it's a very heavy moment, and being present with the body in that room where the person has died creates additional heaviness. And I'm with you. I think people need to come out and take a deep breath sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And we're talking as if every family's happy. Everybody's sad when their loved one dies, that it's a grief event and people want to linger and reminisce, when in fact, not every relationship is good. People who have been abusive, unkind, distant, for whatever reason, also die in the care of their loved ones. It doesn't mean that there's been a big family reunion and everybody's happy.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's a relief, there's a sense, as I've seen a lot happen, is that someone has cared for someone for a really long time and they are ready for this to happen. And then they feel bad because what is wrong with me? I want my mom to hurry up and die. I want my loved one to hurry up and die. But it's something that I do have this conversation even before death with families, that it's okay that you feel that way. I validate their feelings. It is. It's something that you feel. And it happens to a lot of people. You would be very surprised. Once I tell them, like, really, okay, so I'm not the only one feeling this way.
No,
I'm not the only one. And it's like, no, you're not.
No.
And it's okay. It doesn't mean you don't love them. It doesn't mean that you don't care about them. But everybody reaches a point of just complete exhaustion.
Yeah.
A complete burnout. And sometimes after that happens, it's going into the room. And sometimes we have to have that conversation again, because they're like, I was getting so tired of this and now it's gone. And now it's like, I wish they were still here just so that I can know that they're breathing in that room.
Yes.
And you're like, it's okay to feel that way. It's okay to have that feeling. A lot of people go through it. And once I start going and they're like, okay. And then they're like, okay, then now I'm okay that they're gone.
Yeah. But there's some guilt because, people suffer. I've seen that a lot with caregivers who are taking care of someone they love who have dementia or Alzheimer's. That's a horrible decline loss of identity and a loss of functioning, all these different things. And eventually people just say, can we stop this? How do we stop this? How long is this going to take?
Right.
And then afterwards they think, did I somehow, I guess, unconsciously do something to set this death in motion? Well, you don't have that kind of power, first of all. You certainly can't think it into happening. But of course, again, when you layer it with overwhelm and fatigue and grief and loss, all of those emotions make complete sense. All of those thoughts seem very rational and very normal.
Right.
Yeah. I think as a caregiver, you get to just feel how you want to feel.
Mm-hmm.
It's how you act on it that makes a difference, right? If you're deciding you want to withhold mom's meds so that things happen, that's different. But
right.
But I think they should just get to feel the way they feel till they don't feel it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think if we let everybody go through their emotions through this journey, the bereavement side is much more comforting. Don't get me wrong. People are still going to go through their process of grief.
Sure.
But the grief process is I see that it's easier on them when they've been processing through a journey and facing that processing than we just got a terminal diagnosis and 3 days later they're gone, or we just got a diagnosis today and tonight they passed away.
Right. And that does happen. That does happen. Even in hospice, there are deaths that are unexpected. Our patients come to us, they've just been diagnosed, and boom, 4 days later, they're dead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It happens, and it happens very quickly, and you're just like, what in the world? I never will forget. I had this one lady one time. She was very young, came into our inpatient unit, was not be able to move around, very little moving around, but she was fully alert. She was young, had just gotten a end-stage cancer diagnosis, and within 4 hours, no, not even 4 hours, I'm sorry. It was maybe 2 or 3 hours by then. She went to sleep and she was gone.
Yeah.
It can happen very quickly.
I think it probably happens more often instead of, the bedside vigil. I think it happens more often than we talk about. So the doula's there. She's creating sacred space. And what we mean by sacred space is a place that sits in presence and witnesses and provides support. Maybe it's quiet, maybe it's not. Sacred space doesn't have to be quiet. We kind of think of like you enter into a church. Maybe that is part of it, but maybe it's having the family dog there. Maybe it's having a grandchild or a great-grandchild there that's kicking a ball underneath the bed. Presence of family creates sacred space. But it's just a way of recognizing what's happened and sitting with it with courage and grace and calm, just sort of sitting in presence with it. The role of the doula is so important at that point, to be present, to guide, to support, to educate.
To be there.
Absolutely. Just that power of presence. So after the client or the patient, the person has died, what kind of a relationship does an end of life doula have with that family?
I found that most of my clients, I still have a long after relationship with them. I like to set up a little reminder in my Google Calendar, especially at anniversary dates or when it becomes close, but also throughout every month, just checking in at least once with them. Sometimes I have ones that I meet with more time than others, but it can be a simple text. I'm thinking of you.
So it's bereavement support.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I feel that because of this lengthy journey that we go through with our clients, that the bereavement is seamlessly happening. And because we have that relationship, hospice does give a great bereavement. Some offer more than others, and that's awesome. But they don't meet that person until the end. So there was no relationship built. And I find that that's where the doula role is so important, because we've been building that relationship so long. And this is another reason I encourage doulas to really get a lot of grief education as well, because that bereavement process at the end is going to just seamlessly happen. And you might be faced with a lot of questions, in being able to acknowledge this type of grief, this is this type of grief, this is they need to speak to, or we're at a point that they need to get some extra help, therapies or whatever, referrals out for that.
Right.
But we can also notice things when someone has lost someone. We notice, yes, they're going to be different. There are different behaviors slightly, but if it's too unhealthy, someone needs to be able to say, hey, they need more help.
Yeah.
So it's a really important role.
It absolutely is. So I want to touch back on what you were saying. Hospices have bereavement programs, and they follow with families for up to a year. They're required to, up to a year after the patient dies. But if there's been a relationship with an end of life or a death doula, that doula has a different sort of presence just because of the way they work and the way hospice teams work. If you're really lucky, you get a hospice team that actually has a doula working inside them, which is an amazing enhanced piece of end-of-life care. But that doula forms a different kind of relationship. And I think it's also important to remember that grief doesn't stop and start with a death. And grief is not just sadness. When all that guilt and all that stuff we were talking about earlier, that still continues after the death. You may have some relief, but you still have all this mixed bag of emotions. The guilt comes there, regret, and the second guessing. Oh my gosh. We should have never taken her there. We shouldn't have put her in this facility. If I had stayed, I would have been present when she died. All this sort of thing. Or even precipitating out the death with medications. We gave her the morphine and then she died an hour later. I think I killed my mom. Of course, that's not the case. But an end-of-life doula, to be able to support a family when they still have these issues, because that does come with bereavement, being able to have that end-of-life doula support is so valuable, so valuable.
Oh, absolutely. And you hit it right there too about the medications, because, and I educate way before as well and constantly throughout, and especially as we get to that active and imminent stage, you give medication and something happens very quickly shortly after, that it has nothing to do that you gave that. You made them peaceful.
They got comfortable.
Because they got comfortable. Their body was able to finally relax and be at peace. And so it's reinforcing the education to even the very end and after as well.
Yeah. But it's that one-on-one support, one-on-one conversation that a doula provides that's so useful.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So you are the founder of the International Doula Life Movement. Such an important work. You're training doulas, you're educating in your community, partnering with people out in your community with serious illness. You have an incredible event coming up in January of 2024.
Mm-hmm.
Tell my listeners about what you guys are doing in January and how they can connect in.
Yes, so in January, we will be offering our birthday bash. It's our third annual birthday bash. And so we take that week to have special guests each night of the week. We kick it off on Monday, ends on Friday, but we have different guest speakers that come in and hold workshops. And it is, different people from our industry, end-of-life industry, that come in and do special workshops and trainings. And it's a lot of fun. a lot of connections that gets made, friendships that even get made. And it's also our way of giving back to our community as well, from IDLM. So it's a celebration and a give back all at the same time. And you can always go to our website at www.internationaldoulalifemovement.com, or if you can find us on Facebook or Instagram. And we keep up, and be sure, you can go on our website as well and sign up for our newsletter so you don't miss any specials that we have. Our workshops, our birthday bash, they'll be coming up. We don't want you to miss that.
Awesome. Well, I have links in the show notes to all your social and to your website so that people can connect in and participate in the birthday bash. Anna, thank you so much for being with me again today. You guys are doing some fantastic work. Thank you to both you and Pam Carter and IDLM, and so great to talk to you.
Oh, thank you so much.
So you see, sort of to wrap up this series, how a journey with a doula really goes from the beginning of a serious illness through that disease trajectory and decline, through the dying and the death, and then afterwards into the bereavement phase as well. It's interesting to note the kind of one-on-one and personal support that an end-of-life doula can provide. Hospice is capable of doing all of that. But the way hospice is run in this country, the way we make visits, we are not always present for extended length of time with a family and a patient as they are dying. We're not always there when a patient dies, which is a sticking point for a lot of caregivers. I've been asked numerous times as a hospice nurse, will you be here when my mom dies? Will you be here when things get bad? If you call us, we're going to be there when things get bad. But sometimes people die and hospice is not there. Working with an end-of-life doula or a death doula can provide that expert support at the time. Although Anna did say that not every family and every doula provides vigil, which means just sitting and basically being a companion when those things are happening. Not every doula does that, and not every family needs it. She said some of them don't want that, but doulas can do that. So you see how the role of the doula sits within the whole caregiving puzzle as an additional piece in addition to the care that hospice provides. Doulas are also providing education. They help get families ready. When a patient is nearing death, that doula is there to provide support and education, different resources. Like Anna was saying, she uses the Barbara Carnes resource. Barbara Carnes has some great resource. She's an end-of-life educator. So a doula helps to do all of those things. And then when a patient is transitioning, actively dying, leading right up to that death, a doula is there to offer support and even just a calming presence when a family is scared or worried. And that happens a lot. Even if you're prepared and you're educated and you have all those resources and you've read Gone From My Sight and The 11th Hour and all those things, having someone die in front of you is often frightening. It's often frightening. And I would say, even as a nurse, because my mother is still with me, both my parents are still living, I think that I will probably have some degree of fear and worry if I'm there when my mother dies. So having a doula there is really an incredible gift. One of the things that I really want to remember from this interview is what Anna said about caregivers, even hired caregivers that are paid caregivers. Caregivers are trained to help people live. They're not trained to help them die. We teach people how to give meds, how to bathe bodies, how to help people with their personal care so they stay clean, how to do incontinence care, give breathing treatments, make sure oxygen is on, support them when they have to get up to the bathroom. But caregivers aren't typically trained to support people as they die. So take a CNA, for instance, a nurse's aide. In their training that they take to get their certification, they are not trained to be present with a person that's dying. So that's something to think about. They're trained to help people live, not trained to help them die. What that says to me is you need the experts. You wouldn't go to a roofer when you need new tires on your car. So going to hospice and an end-of-life doula when you're facing serious illness and an impending death, those are the experts. That's the right thing to do. Doulas also go beyond that death to provide bereavement support and bereavement care in conjunction with a hospice if there's hospice care involved. Hospice agencies are required to provide bereavement care for up to a year, typically 13 months after the death of a patient, so that they are there for those milestones, that first holiday season, and of course the first anniversary of that death, which is a big deal, which is a very big deal for a lot of people. Doulas also provide that type of support, and oftentimes they have a much more intimate relationship with the caregiver or the family. So check out International Doula Life Movement.com and see their birthday bash coming up in January of 2024. Look at their classes, their courses. A lot of it's offered online. You can see that the work that they're doing in San Antonio, Texas, and connect in with them. Be sure to catch the next episode of the Heart of Hospice podcast. You can find more episodes on theheartofhospice.com, and don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast platform. You can connect with the Heart of Hospice on Facebook and Instagram, and send your questions or comments by email to helen@theheartofhospice.com. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.